One day, the sky was gloomy with the eerie cawing of crows filling the air. Gabimaru was awaiting execution, yet despite the executioner striking him dozens of times, he remained unscathed. Even the executioner's sword broke, much to the astonishment of those present. Gabimaru couldn't understand why he was unable to die, as he no longer had anything in life to cling to. Originally a ninja from the village of Iwakuji, Gabimaru had been trained in assassination techniques from a young age. Many died during training, but those who survived developed extraordinary bodies. This was why the executioner couldn't kill Gabimaru, even though they hadn't yet resorted to using ninjutsu. The next day, Gabimaru was dragged to be burned alive, an excruciating form of execution. Sometimes the victims would be mercifully killed beforehand. Unfortunately, the spear also shattered before Gabimaru, and although the pyre blazed fiercely, he just grimaced as only his clothes burned to ashes. He asked a girl sitting outside the prison to bring him some clothes, but she was too engrossed in her writing to care about him. In fact, Gabimaru had no information about his parents, having only heard that the village chief had killed them when he was young. Since then, Gabimaru had been raised as a ninja, living not with dreams but only to kill on command. He was caught because he had tried to leave the village without the village chief's permission, leading to his betrayal by his teammates during a mission. The next day, Gabimaru was taken out to be torn apart by bulls. A human's legs might withstand about 50 kilograms, but a bull can exert over 950 kilograms of force. This method not only tore the legs, but also ripped the criminal's body from groin to chest. As soon as the straw on the bull's back was set on fire, the animal would go mad and run desperately. However, Gabimaru barely flexed his legs and the bulls couldn't move. Eventually, both animals collapsed. It was then that the girl approached Gabimaru and asked why he had resisted death when it was near, despite his earlier wish to be killed. Gabimaru coldly uttered 3 words that he had nothing, being the best in Iwakuji, recognized by the village chief who had allowed him to marry his daughter. Unlike her cruel and brutal father, she was kind and innocent, completely transforming Gabimaru's chaotic life. Shoes were not to be worn inside the house, and there was a requirement to pray once daily and express gratitude for this life. Gabimaru found himself bewildered and exhausted by her demands. He did not want to lose himself, so he asked the village chief for permission to leave. The chief agreed, but only if Gabimaru completed one final task. Gabimaru knew it was a trap, but even if he escaped, the villagers would still pursue him. He realized that he should not have opposed the chief from the beginning. That evening, someone warned the girl not to get involved with Gabimaru, the soulless monster who had killed 20 people before his capture. Meanwhile, Gabimaru was questioning himself why he could not accept death, deciding to let the next day end it all. This time, he was thrown into a vat of oil heated over 370 degrees, but once again he resisted death. After many failures, the judge resorted to the most reputable method, Sagiri. The girl who had been documenting the information over the past few days was an executioner from the renowned Yamada family. This family had been practicing as sword testers and executioners for generations, hence their impeccable reputation. For the first time in his life, Gabimaru felt the prospect of his head being severed from his neck. Realizing that the woman before him was no ordinary person, his hands shattered the chains before he was even aware of it, and in a blink, Sagiri appeared behind Gabimaru. Fortunately, his body's instinct to dodge reacted in time, but the sword still slightly nicked his neck. Sagiri continued to charge, but Gabimaru jumped away, avoiding the strike and shockingly realizing that he might not want to die yet. Doomed of her profession, Sagiri had witnessed the final moments of many people, from which she learned to discern the emotions of a person before death. After hearing Gabimaru's story, Sagiri concluded that he was still haunted by thoughts of his wife. This statement struck directly at Gabimaru's heart, and he swiftly grabbed a sword to attack Sagiri. She blocked the attack and said he could not die by execution because of his feelings for his wife. Gabimaru angrily shouted that he was a soulless man without any emotions, except that his wife was the only one who said he was not like that. She described him as kind-hearted because he neither despised nor feared the burn scars on her face. In the village of Iwakuji, men were warriors and women were only housewives. No one was allowed to live the way he wanted. It was her own father who caused the burn scars on her face to prevent her from living normally. But it did not extinguish the hope in her heart. Seeing her husband hang his head in guilt, she encouraged him with a warm smile and told him to stay kind. Unsure of what to say, how could someone soulless react so adorably? However, during an exchange of techniques with Sagiri, Gabimaru gritted his teeth and screamed that he was a soulless being, a brutal monster who, despite his efforts, could never be human. He still remembered the horrified expression on his wife's face when she saw him return from each killing, or when she secretly prayed for his safety. That was why Gabimaru wanted to put down his sword and live a peaceful life with his wife. He had thought the village chief would understand since she was his daughter. But no, the chief placed the village's interests above all, sacrificing even his daughter's happiness. At that moment, Gabimaru knew that a monster like him could never have peace. Just then, Sagiri produced a special pardon, which not only cleared all of Gabimaru's criminal charges but also granted him the protection of the shogun. Neither the courts nor the ninja village could touch him now. But in return, he would have to go to hell. Of course, this hell was not the afterlife, but rather its opposite. It was a fertile land overflowing with joy where pain did not exist, known as Shinsenkyo. Since ancient times, it has been referred to by beautiful names such as paradise or heaven. Shinsenkyo was far to the southwest, and those who discovered it were overwhelmed by a scene of flowers in full bloom and butterflies filling the sky, just like in the legends. It was rumored that the Elixir of Immortality existed there, prompting the shogun to send an expedition. However, what returned was a ship full of flowers and dismembered bodies. The shogun continued to send 5 more expeditions, but their bodies ended up nourishing the flowers. Gabimaru thought Sagiri was telling a fairy tale, and indeed, everyone thought so until they saw it themselves, making the shogun even more convinced of its existence. The elixir of life was also there, so he decided to go all in. The next expedition would be selected from the most dangerous death row inmates across the country, with the promise that anyone who brought back the Elixir of Immortality would be granted a pardon. This meant that Sagiri was here to find someone with the skills and the will to live. On her way here, she had heard that Gabimaru's wife was still in the village of Iwakagakure. Since his capture, she had lived a reclusive life, speaking to no one, presumably still waiting for his return. The only way for Gabimaru to reunite with his wife now was to go to the mysterious island with these dangerous criminals and compete with them for the pardon. Before Gabimaru could respond, the judge spoke up in opposition, even threatening to kill Sagiri if she interfered. However, as Gabimaru's tears fell, signaling the end of the game, he suddenly performed a ninjutsu technique, turning himself into a blazing torch that killed all the men inside the prison, while Sagiri subdued the judge. Gabimaru then agreed to search for the Elixir of Immortality, but was annoyed by the detour through Edo. As he resolved himself, his mouth blurted out in annoyance, and Sagiri warned that if he did not want to go, the deal would be off. So he quickly said he would cooperate peacefully with her. Now, no matter what had to be done, Gabimaru was willing to do it all, just to survive and return to his beloved wife. Returning to Sagiri's childhood, her father was once requested by a convicted storyteller, who was about to be executed, to behead him while he was still telling his tale. Of course, he agreed to the request, delivering a strike so swift that the criminal did not even realize his head had been severed from his neck. It was a perfect, painless cut, free from any emotional entanglement, and it became Sagiri's goal to execute such a strike. As she grew up, her ability to execute a clean cut was considered very good, yet her strikes still harbored doubt and fear, causing the criminals a painful death. This was pointed out by another colleague of Sagiri's. She promised to improve but saw little progress. The truth was clearly reflected in the blade. Sagiri's sword grew increasingly heavy with fear, causing suffering to the criminals. She did not know how to eliminate the doubt and fear in her heart to reach the pinnacle her father had. Returning to the present, the 30 most notorious convicts in the country were brought to the 11th shogun Nagiroshi. Sagiri checked the names of a few of them, ranging from murderers to arsonists, even including a former policeman. Initially, they loudly insulted the shogun, but when they heard the announcement that they could go to Shinsenkyo to obtain the Elixir of Life, they would be granted amnesty regardless of their crimes. The atmosphere immediately changed. A convict known for killing women and children shuddered with joy. With this decree, he could act freely without a fear of retribution. Sagiri wondered if she could kill this demon without hesitation. Meanwhile, other convicts rejoiced upon hearing the announcement. But Gabimaru appeared bored, yawning repeatedly. His distinctive white hair and small stature made him stand out, causing the purple-haired woman behind him to recognize him as the soulless Gabimaru. She expressed her disappointment, noting he looked more weak than rumored. Standing nearby, Sagiri was still preoccupied with the thought of beheading Gabimaru. Looking at him now, seemingly harmless, she felt far from the dreadful rumors about him. Perhaps that's why, imagining Gabimaru's death, Sagiri felt such fear that she began to sweat coldly. At that moment, the shogun's subordinate was preparing to explain about Shinsenkyo. But the criminals were uninterested in such matters. They were unmasked and witnessed firsthand the only person who had recently returned from the expedition. When he returned, his body was covered in tumors that blossomed into something unrecognizable as human. The next day, another 60 members are still missing, and the shogun's side has no clues about what happened on the island, except for this living corpse. Hearing this, the criminals immediately changed their minds about going. A dark-skinned young boy then asked what if there was no elixir of immortality on the island, causing a commotion among the others. A tall man responded that participation was voluntary and anyone who didn't like it could leave. As soon as he finished speaking, a large Yakuza immediately stood up to return to his group. But he hadn't gone far before a member of the Yamada family casually requested his head. Now the convicts had no other choice. Each prisoner on the island would be supervised by a Yamada family executioner, and any disobedience would result in immediate beheading. Should their supervisor die, whether by accident or murder, the prisoner would also be executed. If they did not stay with their supervisor, they could forget about returning to the ship. At that moment, the shogun added another requirement. Since the number of boats and Yamada family executioners was limited, the number of prisoners needed to be reduced before heading to the island. Hearing this, a blonde-haired man strangled the person above him to death, essentially suggesting they slaughter each other. Thus, a deadly arena was opened and a blood-soaked killing spree officially commenced. The prisoners attacked each other like wild animals, their hands still bound. They used every method of killing, from strangulation to throwing stones at each other's faces, each desperately trying to secure a spot on the island. Old man Najiroshi watched with interest as such battles were rare these days. Meanwhile, his subordinate standing beside him cursed him as a fool, seeing nothing commendable in watching the prisoners annihilate each other. Nagiroshi was particularly interested in those with a red mark because they possessed special skills like supernatural abilities. For instance, the blonde man who had just smashed another's face was the leader of a bandit gang deep in the Iso Mountains. The purple-haired woman had participated in a raid on Sajiwara Castle last year and defeated all its retainers. The bearded man, known as the Dragon's Sword and Unmatched Awakening, was a swordsman, and the large, muscular man lying sprawled on the ground over there was said to be impervious to any weapon. But more extraordinary was Gabimaru the Soulless, a living legend among the assassins, who now stood motionless amidst the chaos. Iron advised Sagiri to get used to such scenes, warning that it would be even more fierce and brutal once they landed on the island, questioning whether she would then be able to kill. Seizing the moment, Iron reminded Sagiri that she was not suited to be an executioner. A warrior's daughter should live a peaceful life at home, away from the cruel fate of an executioner. If possible, Sagiri would have done just that. Having grown up amidst the strong smell of blood, she had tried to deny her family's legacy. But the Yamadas had always earned their living through the death of others. As a member of the Yamada clan, Sagiri was bullied by her peers and often returned home to cry in her mother's arms. She had intended to turn a blind eye until the truth reflected through her sword made it clear she was the daughter of an executioner, and she couldn't live a normal life like other girls. At that moment, a few prisoners planned to ambush the executioners to escape, targeting Sagiri because they thought she was weak. Iron was about to intervene, but Sagiri stopped him, refusing to passively accept her fate and determined to forge her own path. Despite a moment of fear, Sagiri courageously beheaded 3 prisoners as easily as slicing through bananas, only to be plagued by self-doubt afterwards. Suddenly, Gabimaru's voice brought her back to the present, questioning the necessity of choosing the cruelest ways to kill when there were other options. True, they were all murderers, but not all took pleasure in killing. Sagiri only killed those who needed to be killed, not participating in the bloody game willingly. However, his words only angered the samurai, who then ordered others to kill him to earn their pardon. One of them immediately picked up a rock and threw it at Gabimaru, but he dodged effortlessly. Realizing they were intent on killing him, he reluctantly acted in self-defense. Gabimaru calmly approached the man and in a flash ended him. He dealt with each one harshly like a wild wolf. Gabimaru then ran straight to the sea, performing a mass slaughter under the blazing sunset. With hands stained with fresh blood dripping into the sea, everyone was horrified to realize what it meant to be the #1 assassin in the legend. After witnessing everything, Sagiri realized something crucial. Not the strength to fight her fear of killing, but the resolve to bear the responsibility for the lives she had ended with her sword. This sudden understanding brought tears to her eyes. Iron, standing beside her and thinking she was scared by the earlier scene, asserted that this burden was too great for her, but she sternly stated her intention to kill Gabimaru. In the end, after a frenzied slaughter, the surviving convicts were Eri Chobi, the bandit leader, Tamura the Dragon's Sword, Nore from Senka village, Nurugain the Amnesiac, Hubo the Buddhist killer, Gabimaru the Soulless, Akaivo, a courtesan, Yuzuruhaha, a female ninja, Moyo Makira the heretic, and Yokoyota the giant. These 10 convicts, under the supervision of 10 Yamada clan executioners, would set sail to Hellish Island, also known as the Paradise of Ultimate Bliss, in search of the Elixir of Immortality. In Iwadakure village, there exists an unwritten rule that the village chief, despite being slashed or shot, with his intestines scattered across the ground, cannot die. It is believed that a medicine the chief once accidentally purchased from a foreign merchant has rendered him immortal. Gabimaru shared this story with Sagiri, who, from her expression, clearly did not believe in the existence of such a medicine. Gabimaru affirmed that the Elixir of Immortality was real, though he was unsure if it existed on this particular island. To facilitate their search, the executioners and prisoners split up and headed in various directions. The area, filled with exotic flowers and vibrant birdsong, left Sagiri in awe. Anyone witnessing such beauty might not find it strange if the elixir truly existed here. However, upon hearing Sheng's immediate objection, noting that the place was more frightening than natural, filled with unnatural-looking things, Gabimaru advised Sagiri to stay vigilant instead of getting distracted by the surroundings. After saying this, he tried to break free from his bindings, arguing that tied hands would hinder their search. However, Sagiri, firm in following the general's orders, threatened to execute him if he continued to break the rules. Gabimaru tried to justify bending the rules slightly, also pointing out the illogical aspect of being provided with only enough food for 3 days, with the only clue being a small piece of paper. He suspected that the shogun never truly cared whether they found the elixir or not. Unexpectedly, Sagiri drew her sword towards Gabimaru, reminding him that she was an executioner, not his ally. If he failed in his quest and did not earn a pardon, it would not concern her. Even without the ropes, Sagiri did not hesitate to be ready to decapitate him on the spot. Gabimaru sighed, resignedly extending his hands to be tied, realizing that obeying her was his only way to return to his wife sooner. Just then, an iron weight struck him in the face. Thrown by Nuragane the Amnesiac, one of the 10 prisoners sent to the island, he was a warrior monk, obsessed with armors and weapons, known for having killed and robbed hundreds of weapons from various warriors, despite being strangled. Gabimaru managed to point out that Nuragane was not bound by the hands. Sagiri immediately questioned Nuragane about where his bindings were, to which he replied, mocking her for being too rigid, stating that with such stubbornness, she would always remain a minor figure. At that moment, Nuragane interrupted their conversation, furiously scolding Gabimaru for ignoring him, and decided to use his toolkit to brutally mutilate him as a form of satisfaction. He proclaimed that weapons are most beautiful when bathed in fresh blood and intended to show Gabimaru just how beautiful that could be. Gabimaru didn't understand what this madman was thinking, complaining that lingering around here would only allow others to get ahead. In reality, Nuragane had already figured that since there were no clues from the start, it was fine to kill everyone first and search leisurely later. The executioners from Yamada were merely there to supervise them, allowing them to freely kill each other. Forced into a fight and burdened by the girl's insistence on him wearing his bindings, Gabimaru found himself in a troublesome situation. Nuragane charged at him, delivering a strike that shattered his weapon into pieces. As Nuragane switched weapons, none proved effective, even though Gabimaru calmly tied his bindings with his mouth. Enraged, Nuragane vowed to use everything he had to beat him. But Gabimaru, uninterested in playing along, kicked his stomach, sending Nuragane's robust body flying, shocking both Kaizo and Sagiri. As Nuragane's weapons fell noisily towards Gabimaru, he not only dodged but also kicked the earlier weapon straight into Nuragane's body. It seemed like a lethal blow, but Nuragane, having wrapped himself in armor, survived and laughed heartily, warning Gabimaru that he was doomed. However, it was Nuragane who ended up dead by the very weapons he had collected. Meanwhile, Gabimaru hadn't even broken a sweat despite his hands being tied. At that moment, Kizo unexpectedly drew his sword, not to attack Gabimaru, but to take Nuragane's head back home. Sagiri reminded him to be careful on his return, as 60 other criminals were still scattered across the island. Kaizo felt lucky to escape the chaos early, grateful for the early departure. Just before the ship docked, the prisoners had already tried to eliminate each other, and upon arriving on the island, some conspired for personal gain, with none adhering to social norms. They cared little for laws or duties, and some even considered killing the executioners to survive. For a samurai, the general's command is absolute. But now that doesn't matter because the top priority is to find the Elixir of Immortality. Kaizo mentioned that Ching was even planning to help Sagiri take Gabimaru's head. But before he could draw his sword, Gabimaru stopped him. At this point, he just wanted to return to his wife and was unconcerned with anything else. Kaizo, laughing, urged Gabimaru to hurry, predicting that the situation would completely change in a few hours. Meanwhile, Iron had just arrived on the island because he had to carry the giant Yoku Yoda. Sensing something unusual, he drew his sword and charged, was quickly turned into food for a murderer. Half of the remaining criminals also died upon arriving on the island. The bandit leader Chobi killed the murderer Hubo, and the corsair Akaji was slain by the executioner accompanying her. The apostate Mekira died from a kunai. Kaizo believed that even if everyone died in this expedition, there would be another, as the government had secretly allied with Iwagakure village. Even the executioners were not safe, as Kaizo heard that the next leader of Yamada would be decided after this incident. So ambitious individuals might not spare Sagiri. Reflecting on Kaizo's words, Sagiri realized they were quite accurate. It had been many days since she first met Gabimaru, yet she still couldn't truly understand his nature. While she was deep in thought, Gabimaru suddenly attacked her, proving that no one, especially not the ruthless killers, could be trusted. Gabimaru's parents had wanted to leave the village right after Sheng was born. Being veteran ninjas, they were mercilessly killed by the village chief. This was a lesson for Gabimaru, that emotions could weaken a ninja, and if not strong enough, one couldn't protect oneself, let alone those one deeply cherished. Currently, Gabimaru and Sagiri are engaged in an intense battle, with the sound of clashing swords ringing bitterly. Gabimaru had to find the Elixir of Immortality at all costs before the village forces arrived. Thus, he was compelled to kill Sagiri as she was obstructing him. Meanwhile, Sagiri knew she had to finish Gabimaru, but for some reason she hesitated. Gabimaru also wondered why he hadn't killed Sagiri yet instead of just blocking her attacks. His wife once told him that this meant he no longer wanted to kill and advised him to accept and listen to his own emotions. A person with a strong will is one who is honest with their emotions. Thanks to his wife, Gabimaru began to express his emotions, but this also led him to experience hatred, thus allowing emotions to influence his subsequent missions. Even now, Gabimaru had many opportunities to finish Sagiri, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. Continuing like this, survival on the island, let alone a pardon, seemed impossible. Recalling the village chief's words that without strength, one cannot protect anything, Gabimaru decided to break Sagiri's sword. Yet she resiliently drew her scabbard to counter. However, at the last moment she was subdued under Gabimaru's blade, the emotionless demon within him ready to kill another without hesitation. Yet at the decisive moment, Gabimaru found himself unable to strike. It was then that Sagiri suddenly realized something. Every time he killed, it looked as if he was bearing something terrible. It seemed that Gabimaru too struggled with inner emotions similar to hers. Gabimaru, infuriated to tears by his own weakness, wondered how he could ever reunite with his wife if he continued to be so feeble. Sagiri gently told him that it wasn't weakness, but the seed of strength, suggesting that true power comes from facing one's emotions. She declared that if Gabimaru could repent, face himself, and find the right path again, she was ready to follow him to the end. She wanted him to prove that even a criminal like him could overcome his ego to start anew. Sagiri realized that she too needed to face her own emotions to become stronger. Through their recent battle, they gained a deeper understanding of each other and began to place their trust in one another. Meanwhile, in a different scenario, the samurai Tamura had his hand burned by a human-faced butterfly. He immediately amputated his hand to prevent the poison from spreading throughout his body. The executioner Kawachi was shocked, but realized the severity of the situation when he saw the severed hand turn dark and sprout flowers. Soon after, a host of bizarre creatures surged in, and the ground shook violently due to the appearance of a long-tongued demon. On the other side, Gabimaru was also facing an extremely strange creature. Reviewing the past of Long King Tamura, after days of wandering without finding a worthy opponent, he agreed to join under Tatsumi, a boastful man who always bragged about his large mansion. It was only for the sake of food and clothing and the dragon in his name that Tamura reluctantly accepted. However, once during drunken night, Tatsumi mockingly stated that Tamura, nicknamed Dragon Sword, could not kill a real dragon, which led him to furiously destroy the dragon statue on the gate and the liver of that timid dead dragon, resulting in his expulsion from the clan and a death sentence. Tamura wanted to obtain a pardon to gain his freedom, and then continue to refine his swordsmanship and split that mansion in two. Kuhai could not comprehend this twisted thinking, while Tamura did not understand why he carried surgical knives. Kuhai explained that the Yamada family was known not just for swordsmanship, but also for medical practices. Kuhai's specialty was performing autopsies to advance medical science. Suddenly, Kuhai drew his sword in warning, presenting sudden death before Tamura's eyes, prompting him not to ask further and to walk away. Tamura's plan was to eliminate other rivals and then search for a mythical elixir, a view Kuhai quite agreed with. Meanwhile, Gabimaru's opponent at that moment was a bizarre creature, with a fish head and a human body. It suddenly snapped the rosary in its hand and launched a Gomu Gomu no attack at Gabimaru. However, Gabimaru not only dodged, but also shattered its mouth. Although he was then caught by the creature and slammed to the ground. Fortunately managing to escape, this creature was unlike anything Gabimaru had encountered before, and by ninja law, he should not engage with it. Debating whether to flee alone or with Sagiri, he was suddenly grabbed by the sharp tail of the creature and thrown away. Gabimaru was already severely injured by just one opponent, and now a horde of gigantic monsters was approaching. Faced with their menacing smiles, Sagiri felt a bit scared. Meanwhile, Gabimaru had already entered battle mode. He charged like lightning, using his fire technique to burn the long-haired monster, and then decapitated another demon. At that moment, Gabimaru's mind was filled with only 3 words: kill to live, while Sagiri stood below, merely staring in shock. Everything she was witnessing was completely different from reality, and in a moment of distraction, Sagiri was approached by a creature from behind and moreover blocked from retreating by the murderous horde. Initially, Gabimaru intended to let the creature eliminate Sagiri in his place, but then he teleported to sever the creature's arm to save her. It was only after everything had calmed down that he realized what he had just done. The green creature, planning a sneak attack, was split in half by another swordsman. That was when Yusutiya appeared, a ninja like Gabimaru, who wanted to become close friends with him. Remembering his wife's advice to express gratitude when helped, Gabimaru bowed in thanks before asking what Yuzuriya wanted from him. There seemed no reason for her to assist him in their fierce struggle. Yuzuriya approached Gabimaru, praising his strength and reliability, and expressed her marriage proposal. The cheap tricks of a female ninja did not fool Gabimaru, who gently threw her down to the ground to teach her a lesson for proposing to a married man. Caught in her act, Yuzuriya was somewhat embarrassed but genuinely intended to collaborate with him, arguing that 5 people were better than 2. Before discussing further, Sagiri questioned why Yuzuriya had 2 swordsmen as escorts. In reality, Genji was responsible for dealing with traitors, but he had been deceived and killed by Yuzuriya, who believed one person was not enough to supervise her and thus followed her. However, Gabimaru and Sagiri quickly realized that Genji had been tricked by Yuzuriya. The person originally responsible for escorting her was a man named Senta. Yuzuriya quickly silenced him and continued to persuade both sides to cooperate. As soon as Sagiri agreed, a ninja woman stopped playing and seriously proposed a deal. She would provide information in exchange for Gabimaru's strength and protection. The bizarre creatures they had just encountered were nothing compared to the bugs here. The human-faced butterflies could poison and hallucinate their victims on close contact. Yuzuriya had learned this through Makuya, whom she had befriended and tricked into becoming her test subject. The centipedes looked somewhat creepy but only fed on dead bodies, so they were not a concern, and other insects would not attack unless provoked. Knowing all this was thanks to Makuya's efforts, Yuzuriya simply pretended to be dead to catch him off guard, and then killed him. Senta continued to provide additional useful information, noting that many items on the creatures bore distinct religious symbols, mostly a mix of Buddhism and Taoism. The more they learned, the less this island seemed like a paradise. Sagiri also discovered that the internal structures and muscles of the monsters cut by the swords were from a living species. At that moment, Yuzuriya excitedly stated that collaborating to gather information was the right thing to do, which made Gabimaru wonder why she was trying so hard to get the elixir. It turned out Yuzuriya had a sick younger sister and had turned to the path of the ninja due to a lack of money for medicine, and she shared her hardships in training to become a ninja. However, Gabimaru knew from just the first sentence that this girl was bluffing. In reality, Yuzuriya had no particular reason. She simply did not want to die young. Gabimaru still had one more question. What exactly had she done to Makuya? Yuzuriya squinted mischievously and claimed she did nothing, while subtly warning him not to pry into others' affairs if he didn't want to die young. Gabimaru then agreed to cooperate, making her so happy. Sagiri watched their playful banter, questioning what she had accomplished since setting foot on the island. As she pondered this, she suddenly fainted. In another development, the young Nan Toma was accepted into the Yamada clan after just 1 month of training. The final test he had to pass before being promoted was to decapitate a criminal. Toma himself suggested a place to go to rescue his older brother Chobe, who had been tortured for a month waiting for his younger brother to come to his rescue, only to find out that the only way to escape was to reach this cursed island. Fortunately, Chobe was not afraid of the bizarre creatures but was thrilled to behead them in a moment of excitement. From a young age, Toma admired his brother's ability to grasp situations. After the lord they were serving committed a crime and was forced to dissolve their clan, their mother died from a severe illness, and their father was executed shortly afterward for participating in a revenge plot. The 2 brothers knew nothing but to sit and beg at the street corners, being attacked by robbers. Yet Chobe managed to turn the situation around and make enemies into friends. When he grew up, Chobe became a bandit leader sought after and killed, but he still tried to protect his brother, believing that Toma would definitely come back to save him. From childhood to adulthood, being protected by his brother, Toma concluded that the best adapters are the strongest. Chobe was a master of adaptation. If he couldn't grasp the situation, he would flee only to regain control later. Like now, as the 2 were running, Toma was grabbed by a green monster. However, Chobe kept running, his invincibility stemming from abandoning things that couldn't change. But the once frail Toma was no more. Now he could sever the monster's arm by himself, even holding the creature's back to let his brother escape. Suddenly, Chobe turned back and bisected the monster, revealing he had only gone to retrieve a weapon from the creature. As the brothers were talking, Shobei was stabbed by another creature, bleeding from the mouth, and these creatures could even talk and tightly surrounded the two. In a moment of fear and confusion for Tomo, Shobei remembered the day he was sentenced to death and burst out laughing. He leaped up high, splitting the bead-wearing creature in half, then cut another next to it, and continued slashing through the monsters like chopping bananas. Tomo was extremely proud of his outstanding brother. Recalling the past when he followed the bandits crying and wanting to go home, it seemed absurd for a former samurai's son to turn into a robber. At that time, Shobei had advised his younger brother to just believe in him and ignore everything else. After slaughtering all the monsters, Shobei decided to eliminate anyone who stood in their way and then continue with his brother to find the Elixir of Immortality. In a state of delirium, Sagiri, as a child, did not understand why her father always looked at her with eyes full of disappointment. Fortunately, she snapped out of her nightmare at this moment. Confused about her surroundings, Genji explained that she had been poisoned by butterflies and had passed out, prompting the group to take a rest in a cave, away from monsters and insects. Although not fully recovered, Sagiri still wanted to supervise the criminals. However, when she stepped outside, she saw Gabimaru busy cooking dinner, sewing clothes, and Yuzuriya taking on the supervisory role. While collecting ingredients for cooking, Gabimaru surveyed the island and found nothing resembling the Elixir of Immortality. Hearing Yuzuriya ask what he knew about the fruit, he dismissed his suspicions that the village chief was immortal and admitted that it was the first time he had heard of it, so his search was based only on the drawings. Gabimaru also discovered several flower species similar to those found on the bodies of samurai brought back to the mainland. From this, he deduced that all 60 people from the previous expedition had met the same fate, and thus most of the island's flora had once been human. Upon hearing this, Yuzuriya threw the food at Gabimaru's face because he dared to use human flesh for the group's meal. However, Gabimaru explained that he did not use those plants. It was then that Senta suggested that they should not focus too much on the fruit drawings but also pay attention to the words beside them. The stone statues around the island had features associated with Buddhism and Taoism, raising the question of who created them and whether they were still living there. Sagiri did not think there was anyone on the island besides them, as both the monsters and insects were too dangerous for humans. The ecology and behavior of these creatures were also very mysterious. They had bones but no internal organs. Their appearance was even more bizarre, with animal heads growing out of deformed human bodies. The religious artifacts worn by the monsters were of poor quality, making them frightening yet simultaneously very foolish. Senta thought that everything had been thrown into a sick and mysterious vortex, rendering all logic useless on this island. Yet Gabimaru laughed with delight, arguing that a creature that could live without organs was a clue to immortality. The elixir of life existed on this island, and finding it was only a matter of time. Yuzuriya also joked that perhaps the group had died, and this island was the afterlife. Senta dismissed that morbid idea and agreed with Gabimaru's view. At present, they should start exploiting clues by investigating the monsters, observing where and how they live. As dusk fell, casting a radiant glow over the forest, Genji advised Sagiri to take a boat back to the mainland, leaving the rest to him since his criminals had already died. The women of the Yamada house are obliged to marry the next clan leader, so Sagin would not punish her for this. Seeing that Sagiri disagreed because she had not completed her mission, Genji admired her spirit but criticized it as unrealistic. Currently, Sagiri was not strong enough to kill Gabimaru, and her sword was taken from the corpse of the mindless Nuragane. A sword is a warrior's heart, and it is common for a sword to break on the battlefield. Genji acknowledged Sagiri's extraordinary swordsmanship, but as a sword tester and executioner, this island required practical combat skills, which Sagiri lacked and exceeded the limits of a woman. Just then, Senta approached and asked a critical question: whether it would be easy to return when most samurais who came to the island never returned. The proof was right there, as two people were crossing the dense fog to leave the island. Tenya, full of vigor, climbed aboard the boat only to be scolded as foolish by the boy Nurgai. He suggested that Tenya observe the flow of the water instead of trying to force his way through and exhausting himself. Tenya listened as if enlightened, realizing this was the wisdom of the Senka clan. He promised to bring Nurgai back safely and asked Sagin for his pardon. As among the criminals, he was the most deserving of life. Just then, they encountered a large ship, thinking it was from the Maku government, only to find the area littered with shipwrecks all over the sea. The surrounding atmosphere was chillingly eerie, and the bizarre creatures were intermittently appearing behind the bones. Tenya drew his sword ready to fight, but Nurgai told him not to do so, though it was too late, as by then they had been attacked by several tentacles that capsized their boat. After jumping aboard, Nurgai explained that the animals here were very sensitive to light and hostility. Unfortunately, now the tentacles had surrounded them both, and Tenya had no choice but to run and slash at anything in sight while searching for any usable boat nearby. In this precarious situation, Nuruga suddenly remembered his grandfather's advice. He must survive to continue the Senka clan's bloodline. Everything started when Nurugai accidentally saw the samurai wandering on the mountain. Thinking they were lost, so he kindly offered to lead them down the mountain. One of them suggested resting at his village, but he inadvertently brought danger home, resulting in a brutal massacre of the entire village that very day. Moreover, Nurugai was captured and awaited execution after they extracted all information about the Senka clan. In his most desperate moment, Tenya appeared, determined to rescue the pitiful Nurugai by bringing him to this island with him. As they were fleeing, they stumbled upon the flower-covered corpse of Kaizo. Tenya wanted to save his teammate, but suddenly a tentacle cleaved the man in two. Now dozens of twisting tentacles had surrounded the area, and Nurugai, seeing Kaizo's body, remembered his grandfather. He lost all spirit and collapsed to the ground, overwhelmed with guilt and self-loathing, no longer wanting to flee or fight. He thought this was the punishment he deserved for causing the death of his grandfather and everyone in the village. The tradition of the Sankat is to live for the mountain and the village. Now that he was the only survivor while everyone else was dead, he felt no desire to continue living. Tenya, unconcerned with these traditions, kept slashing at the tentacles to protect Nurugai, determined to bring him back regardless. After a moment of clarity facilitated by his elder brother, Nurugai grasped the situation and was tossed a sword, with the goal of overcoming the monsters to reach a boat ahead. After an exhausting struggle, they safely reached the shore, although all currents here led back to the island, and only by finding an outward flow could they hope to escape. After bathing, the two decided to walk around the island to find an outward current. Back with Sagiri's group, Genji still insisted she return at dawn. Senta half agreed with him, but also wanted Sagiri to stay in case Gabimaru caused trouble. That night, Sagiri came to supervise Gabimaru instead of another executioner, and he unexpectedly asked if she was feeling better, surprising her greatly. It turned out Gabimaru had intentionally chosen the cave as a resting place to wait for her wounds to heal. Thanks to Sagiri, Gabimaru had become more calm and determined, ready to devise a plan of counterattack even if the Iwagakure village were to come. Gabimaru, wanting to live with his wife, decided not to flee from his adversaries anymore, but to confront them directly. He also encouraged Sagiri not to doubt herself, as she was truly strong. She just hadn't fully realized it yet. Therefore, the next morning, Sagiri bluntly refused Genji's request to return. She had lived under the judgmental eyes of others for too long. As a woman of the Yamada clan, all she wanted was to be recognized as a true samurai. She knew she was still weak and inexperienced, but at least she wanted to choose her own way of living. Both men and women can prove their worth when given the opportunity and knowing how to seize it. Upon hearing this, Genji's face darkened and he drew his sword in anger, proclaiming that the island was a battlefield, not a place for women and children. However, Sagiri quickly seized his sword, adhering to the lesson that one could find weapons on the battlefield from the day before. Frustrated, Genji grabbed his sword back only to be suddenly struck by Yoda, who sliced open his abdomen. Yoda was born into a family that loved him dearly. From a young age, he gained more than other children, which might explain the terrifying strength that was latent in him since childhood. He could kill his own parents just by throwing stones, and he turned the villagers into corpses. Currently, Genji, in order to protect Sagiri, had bitten off one of Yoda's hand claws, causing him to fly back as his back slammed against a tree trunk. Horrified, Sagiri ran to check on him, and Genji, with his last breath, urged her to flee before it was too late. However, at that moment, Yoda lunged towards Sagiri, but Gabimaru appeared in time and kicked him away. Despite his massive body rolling on the ground, breaking several trees, he was unharmed and managed to get up. Sagiri worriedly mentioned that he was the giant from Bizen, assigned to accompany Iron, but now wandering alone. Gabimaru stared into Yoda's bloodthirsty eyes, knowing it was inevitable that he would have to kill him. However, the recent kick proved ineffective, indicating that Yoda's body was as tough as a ninja from Iwagakure. According to the ninth steel law of ninjas, the village chief taught Gabimaru to always analyze his opponent before attacking, so he needed to test how strong Yoda was before devising a suitable attack strategy. Yoda, being hot-headed, uprooted a large tree with one hand and hurled it at Gabimaru. Sagiri gritted her teeth and used her body to shield Genji, while Gabimaru instructed her to stay put rather than foolishly rushing to assist him. As Yoda's physical prowess surpassed Gabimaru's, he called for Yuzuriha to help, yet she responded that she was only responsible for gathering information, and that the fighting depended entirely on Gabimaru, and sitting there cheering for him was already quite good. Frustrated, Gabimaru's eyes twitched continuously, but he had to quickly set that aside as Yoda approached. The upcoming slap seemed not too dangerous, and he planned to concentrate his strength to punch Yoda's right hand. However, as the large hand was about to hit him, his ninja instincts told him that dodging was essential to avoid certain death. Indeed, Yoda's hand smash stirred up the earth beneath Gabimaru. Seeing his prey narrowly escape death, Yoda continued to flail his arms and legs in an attempt to catch him. But to no avail, Gabimaru was forced to jump back, surprised by the large body's quick reaction. His instincts told him that if he took the hit head-on, his flesh would be torn and bones crushed. Consequently, Gabimaru stomped on the ground, using the ninja technique Stone Thunder Kick to shoot a series of rocks at high speed towards Yoda. The force was enough to pierce through tree trunks, yet the giant took all hits without a scratch. Gabimaru then used the invincible cloth technique, making the fabric wrapped around his waist as hard as iron and steel, but still could not injure him. He continued to activate long-range ninja techniques to attack, but none were effective, as if Yoda's body was invincible. By this time, Genji was very weak and advised Sagiri not to try in vain any longer and to run, but she ignored him and insisted on stopping his bleeding. Now Genji saw her show emotions like a normal woman. Tears welled in Sagiri's eyes as she said, whether man or woman. What does it matter at this point? She just didn't want her senior fellow to die before her eyes. Genji finally understood how Sagiri accepted opposition as a part of herself. He acknowledged that she was the embodiment of the middle way, and thus Genji handed over his sword to her, telling her she was determined to stay in this fierce battlefield, to take the sword and decapitate Yoda to avenge him in iron. Gabimaru, on the other side, was disoriented as he could not engage in close combat, nor was effective from a distance. He almost couldn't get close to the opponent, but could only dodge. If only there was another person to join the battle, he might find a blind spot. As he was deep in thought, suddenly Yoda screamed because Sagiri had returned and cut off one of his fingers, now more formidable than before. Just understanding the structure of the body and delivering a sword strike through the spaces between muscles, tendons, and bones, the Yamada swordsman could sever even the strongest bodies, applying this principle no matter how dangerous the opponent was. While Gabimaru and Sagiri prepared to fight together, Senta offered to bandage Genji's wounds. However, Yashiriha, knowing he was not really kind-hearted, kept Senta back to observe a bit longer, suggesting they could still run after the others died. Gabimaru's plan was to behead Yoda, but since his neck was too high, he suggested they split up. Sagiri would handle tripping Yoda from a blind spot, making him kneel, while Gabimaru would keep him busy with counterattacks. Seizing the opportunity, Sagiri slipped behind Yoda to strike at the joint between his legs, but her sword could not penetrate his thick skin. She reminded herself to remain calm. Putting emotions aside to let reason lead, Gabimaru signaled to try again. But after blocking a punch from Yoda at that moment, his legs trembled violently. Meanwhile, Sagiri failed to sever his arm, realizing that cutting through Yoda's bones while he was in a rage was very difficult, as his movements narrowed the gaps between his bones, leaving no space for her sword to penetrate. Typically, a beheading is performed when the condemned bows their head, and to kill Yoda with a single blow would require him to bow down. But how to make him bow was the critical question. As the two were strategizing, they heard a gurgling sound from Yoda's stomach, and he suddenly burst into intense crying, his screams sounding like they could punch the listener's ears. Hunger made Yoda lose all reason as he lunged at Gabimaru, burying half of his body under dirt and rocks. Fortunately, Gabimaru managed to struggle free. His mind was alert, but his body could not move. In this dire moment, Sagiri mustered all her courage to stand in front of Gabimaru. She calmed herself and then flicked her sword lightly, making Yoda's punches ineffective against her. Sagiri turned her emotions into strength, using reason to track her target, not choosing one approach over another, but blending them seamlessly. Yujiriya exclaimed in admiration. Senta explained that the ranking in the Yamada family was not determined merely by pure skill, but also by suitability for leading the family. Because Sagiri was a woman, she was only ranked 12th, even though her sword skills were better than the top ranked at the moment. Indeed, Sagiri continuously demonstrated her abilities, deflecting all the powerful punches of the giant, finally exhausting him until he collapsed heavily to the ground. Sagiri immediately seized this opportunity to teleport behind Yoda's neck, but he quickly leaped backward to dodge the strike. However, the time she bought to save Gabimaru was enough for him to devise a new plan. As he activated the Stone Thunder Kick with intense fire on himself, Yuzurita sensed the danger and called Senta to leave quickly. Gabimaru then executed the Stone Thunder Kick with fire, and as he kicked towards Yoda, the giant deflected the kicks in various directions. Gabimaru continued to use fire release techniques to attack Yoda, and while they did not burn him, they enraged him to the point of crying. However, Gabimaru's goal was not just to enrage him. He was striving to set the entire forest on fire. Yuzuriha, while running, explained to Senta that they were intentionally burning the fresh branches to make Yoda cry out of anger, which would lead to him gasping for breath and inhaling the smoke, eventually succumbing to carbon monoxide poisoning. His strategy would force Yoda to bow down to avoid the toxic gases infiltrating his lungs, a posture perfect for Sagiri to execute her most skilled slash. Yoda attempted to attack her, but Gabimaru held him down by grabbing his arms, making it easier for her to strike. Sagiri's mind was calm as water as she gently swung down her blade. Childhood memories flashed before Yoda's eyes, always hungry, always feeling lonely with no one to play with. But in this moment, Yoda felt a comforting warmth as Sagiri consoled him, wishing him peace despite his misdeeds. As the fire grew larger, Sagiri had to flee with Gabimaru, leaving Genji behind. The memories surfacing made her tear up. If she did not want anyone else to die, her only option was to become stronger. The fire attracted the monsters of the island, which normally would avoid such events. Gabimaru thought they should follow the direction the monsters had come from. The ecosystem of these monsters was the only clue to the Elixir of Life, so despite his reluctance, he had to track them down to be reunited with his wife sooner. Sagiri also had to put aside her concerns for other swordsmen and focus on finding the elixir with her team as quickly as possible. After a frantic escape from the blaze, the two encountered Yuzuriha and Senta standing right ahead. Below the dense fog lay a small village, potentially Shinsenkyo. Could this be where the legendary hermits have lived? In a different development, the brothers Chobai and Tomo had just farmed a batch of monsters. Chobai asked about the hermits his brother had mentioned. Tomo explained that they were an immortal species, mostly appearing as old men and using mysterious spells. Chobai was indifferent to these stories. If they were real, he would kill them all and then search for the elixir of life. While they were talking, they heard a strange noise and Chobai immediately went to investigate, discovering two unfamiliar persons. Their impeccable beauty made Tomo stare in awe. The blonde girl was both surprised and angry that someone could have reached this far. Then her entire body gradually transformed into a large monster. At this moment, Gabimaru was no longer surprised by the bizarre things here. What mattered was whether the hermits were friends or foes to them. Suddenly, Gabimaru realized someone was watching him from behind. He immediately followed and quickly caught the pink-haired child, unsure whether they were from the mainland or a local resident. Before he could recover from the shock, he was attacked by a tall tree swinging a club. As the three others caught up, Yuzuriha asked if this was some kind of bonsai creature. While everyone was still curious about the tree, the little girl dashed away and Gabimaru immediately followed, thinking she might know something about the island. He then dodged a strike from the tree with a swift roll and kicked it towards the others to handle. Sagiri quickly followed him, leaving Yuzuriha and Senta to deal with the tree trunk. Yuzuriha unexpectedly took off Senta's glasses because she didn't want him to see her abilities yet. Then she drank something that gave her slime powers, taking this chance to test whether her new ninjutsu would work on the monster. Gabimaru was closely following the girl, who despite her small size, ran quickly and even managed to knock him over with a fall. Gabimaru was so astonished that a small child could do this. Just then, Sagiri caught up, saying she had no bad intentions and just wanted to ask the girl some questions. Unexpectedly, the girl stopped, and just as Sagiri thought she had successfully communicated, the girl waited for her to get close and then threw a punch. Fortunately, Gabimaru appeared in time to block the punch for her. The force not only repelled him but also made a powerful ninja like him bleed. The strength was not as overwhelming as Yoda's. It seemed to be just pure strength of the girl. Gabimaru didn't know she was human. Unfortunately, Gabimaru's wife was waiting at home, and he needed to complete his mission as quickly as possible, so he resorted to drastic measures. Specifically, he used the vines in the forest to tightly chain the girl and hang her up high. Faced with Gabimaru's menacing look and threats, the pink-haired girl was so scared that she burst into tears, and even after being released, she continued to cry. Sagiri had to embrace and soothe the girl to stop her from screaming, indicating that she was just a normal child. When they returned to where Yuzuriha and Senta were, everything had already been resolved. Gabimaru was eager to extract information from the girl, but she was still crying and thus he couldn't ask anything. Suddenly, the wooden creature rose up trembling, telling them to return the girl to him in exchange for guiding them to the village. Seeing a creature on the island that could talk stunned the group except Yuzuriha, who calmly declined the wooden creature's offer. This creature tried to tempt them with food, but to no avail, until he mentioned a bathtub, which made Yuzuriha agree to follow him right away. Sagiri wasn't sure whether this was a right or wrong move, while Gabimaru didn't care who the opponent was as long as they provided information about the elixir of life. In case they tried anything funny, he was confident he could eliminate them in an instant. They followed the wooden creature and reached a dilapidated village engulfed in fog, which looked very eerie. The wooden creature explained that it didn't look like this 1,000 years ago, then led them to his home to rest. The decorative items in the house were very old, making Gabimaru suspicious that this creature was stalling and not actually living here. The wooden creature asserted his credibility, so Gabimaru tentatively believed him and prepared some questions for clarification. However, Yuzuriha wanted to take a bath first and then ask questions, despite Gabimaru stating there was no time for that. But eventually, Yuzuriha jumped into the bathtub. He scolded Senta for not being strict with her, but the latter, being a swordsman, had no real authority. Yuzuriha advised Gabimaru not to overwork himself. Sagiri also joined Yuzuriha in the bath, claiming to supervise her on behalf of Senta. Suddenly, the pink-haired girl placed a towel down for Sagiri and then dashed out. Meanwhile, Senta wanted to drink water, but Gabimaru didn't allow it, fearing it wasn't safe. Just then, the wooden man brought in a tray of delicious fresh fruit, making Senta excited to eat. Gabimaru saw his desire and told Senta to go ahead and eat. Then he asked about the relationship between the wooden man and the pink-haired girl, but it was a secret the wooden man couldn't reveal. Gabimaru then requested the wooden man to tell him about the island and the location of the Elixir of Life. However, as soon as he finished speaking, Yuzuriha barged in, disrupting them, and soon everyone was eating heartily, except for Sagiri and Gabimaru, who didn't eat anything. The wooden man explained that this place was called the Land of the Gods, where deities resided, and the Elixir of Life they were searching for was known as Dan, the source of eternal life. The island was divided into 3 areas: the shore and forest known as Ryu, the village they were in was in an area called Hoyo, and the dam was located in Bonglei, the central area of the island. Senta stood up excitedly to gather such useful information, and Gabimaru's heart raced with the confirmation that the Elixir of Life did exist, which meant he could potentially return to his wife. However, Gabimaru still needed tangible proof of its existence. The wooden man stated that eventually he would meet the great immortals, and by then, he would have to believe whether he wanted to or not. Indeed, the 2 beings that Shobai and Toma encountered were the ones referred to by the wooden man. Even though Shobai cleaved the golden-haired entity in 2, it could regenerate just like before. Even when Shobai axed down the creature, effortlessly blocked with one hand, shattering the weapon into hundreds of pieces. They might defeat the sea gods, but the great immortals were of a different level. The wooden creature welcomed them warmly because this was the furthest place they could come. Everyone who came to the island shared the same fate. Gabimaru and Yuzuriha, hearing this, pointed their weapons at the wooden man, but he slowly insisted he was telling the truth. The great immortals killed all who trespassed on the island because they were the most important beings on the island. They commanded the sea gods and punished the guilty, specifically those who came to the island with malevolent intentions. After Toma was severely beaten, he was thrown into a pit surrounded by the corpses of those from previous expeditions. All had turned into beautifully vibrant flowers, yet with the scent of death. Seeing his brother about to share the same fate, Toma immediately ran over to pull the clinging plants off his body. These reincarnated flowers of the island became the source of the Dan. The wooden man demonstrated that it was not merely a legend by breaking his own arm and then regenerating it as good as new, also mentioning that he had lived for thousands of years. Gabimaru questioned whether the pink-haired girl was like him, but was immediately scolded by Sagiri and Yuzuriha for pointing his sword at someone's face. The wooden man reaffirmed that this was indeed the land of the gods and that the fate of those who entered was decided by the gods, with nearly no chance of leaving the island. Later, Sagiri followed Gabimaru to watch over him, even though she was nearly falling asleep before. After gathering more information, Gabimaru concluded 2 main points. The Elixir of Life was located in Bonglei and was protected by the great immortals. Sagiri was still somewhat skeptical about Hoko, the wooden man, and Mei, the pink-haired girl, who were born and had grown up on the island for centuries. They wanted to continue living quietly and were indifferent to the gods or the elixir. Sagiri did not dismiss everything Hoko said, but she was also not ready to accept the truth about the great immortals. According to Senta, the great immortals were high-level hermits, and terms like Bonglai were from foreign Taoist teachings. Gabimaru advised her to focus on finding the elixir and worry about other matters later. As he entered the bath, there were numerous scars on his back. While bathing, he actually disliked bathing because it made him feel as if his fighting instincts were being washed away. After finishing bathing, Gabimaru also advised Mai not to be ashamed of the scar on her body, as he knew a woman with a large scar who was the most beautiful person in the world to him. Hearing this, Mai ran over and clung to his clothes, no longer afraid of him as before. Meanwhile, Sagiri's view of Gabimaru was also changing. Perhaps he wasn't such a bad person, and was gradually changing little by little. However, the moment of rest and relaxation passed, and Gabimaru was brought back to the harsh reality. He suddenly remembered that his top priority was to rescue his wife instead of wasting time here with idle chatter. Returning to Tenya's past, he was once a despised and underestimated street youth, born and raised in the slums. His parents couldn't afford to support him, so Tenya had to leave home. Except for murder, he did whatever it took to make money, living under the sky as he grew up. One day, Tenya accidentally bumped into a group of samurai on the street who intended to gang up on him but ended up getting beaten down by him instead. Just as he was about to deliver a fatal blow, a swordsman from the Yamada family appeared, pointed his sword at Tenya, and told him to stop. In the present, Tenya and Narugai were wandering along the beach looking for a reverse current, but the scorching sun seemed about to burn them both. Tenya complained about the pessimism of the girl next to him, feeling that his idea was the best someone like him could come up with. Since the forest was full of bugs and dangerous monsters, he didn't want to lead Narugai into it. This made the girl admire him even more, and she was determined to have this good boy as her husband. Tenya gave in to her persistence, deciding that any talk of marriage would wait until they survived and left the place, now focusing on avoiding combat to ensure safety. However, their plans were thwarted when they unfortunately encountered a girl who descended from the sky onto the sea. This person also had the ability to change into a monster, which meant she was one of the great fairies. Seeing this, Tenya shouted that this creature was a monster and ran into the forest. However, a man with orange hair quickly caught up to them, and with a single palm strike, Tenya was knocked into a tree trunk. Muragai was alarmed and tried to run to her future husband, but the orange-haired man stopped her, and before he could launch an attack, Narugai's reflexes proved quicker, and she even managed to leap back to where Tenya was lying unconscious on the ground. The orange-haired man complimented her on her speed, which was quite good for a human, and then slowly approached them. At that moment, Tenya swung his sword at the face of the orange-haired man, but he healed the wound instantly. Witnessing this, Tenya was shocked and told Narugai that she must absolutely not engage in combat. Although Tenya wasn't very intelligent, he was proud of the speed of his swordsmanship, launching several deceptive strikes that quickly severed parts of the orange-haired man's body. Seizing the opportunity, Tenya and Narugai ran deeper into the forest, thinking they had finally escaped. However, the man quickly reattached his body parts and caught up with Tenya, scolding him for ruining his clothes. As he stood blocking their path, a sword suddenly flew and decapitated him as swiftly as a gust of wind. Turning around, Tenya saw his master and cried out, resulting in his master urging them to run as fast as possible. He proudly introduced his master as Shin, while Narugai was amazed to discover that this person was blind yet moved swiftly. Tenya explained that Shin could see by sensing smells and sounds. After a frantic run, the three stopped to catch their breath. Tenya was out of breath, but still told Narugai that with Shin there, they had nothing to worry about. While he was boasting about his master, Shin tapped him on the head and pointed out many mistakes of his foolish disciple. Tenya relied too much on speed, while his movements were extremely careless. Facing such an opponent, he should aim at the head or legs first, ensuring each strike was decisive. Each reminder was accompanied by a tap on the head, which embarrassed Tenya, yet he felt relieved to have his master there. Shin was also happy that his disciple was alright, having thought the last time he saw this young man was on a boat. It was then that Tenya realized his master was alone without any prisoners. Shin explained that he had completed his duty and was preparing to return home. However, he couldn't find any current leading off the island, but after much effort, he finally found the only way out. However, Shin heard a noise and detected a presence he had never encountered before, which posed a challenge for someone blind like him. So he decided to go back and search for more people to form a team to return together. Tenya immediately asked to join, but Shin first demanded an explanation for why he was protecting a criminal. The swordsman had the right to execute a prisoner if they violated the rules or in unexpected situations. While the master was quick and efficient, the student was enthusiastically supporting the prisoner. If Tenya could provide a satisfactory reason, Shin would reconsider. Tenya argued that Narugai hadn't committed any crime, but Shin had memorized most of the contents of the death row list and was aware of their circumstances. However, the era they lived in defined what was considered a crime, and the Yamada clan was merely the sword of the era without the right to choose whom was struck. Above all, violating the rules was seen as an act of treason by the Yamada clan, where the reckless actions of one could threaten the safety of the others. Hearing this, Tenya immediately countered that it was Shin who had taught him how to wield a sword. Shin had taken in a homeless individual like Tenya because he sensed resourcefulness and potential in the young man. Tenya asserted that the same situation applied to him and Narugai. She didn't deserve a punishment as severe as death, as she had a lot of potential for development if given freedom. Shin was quite surprised by the sudden maturity of his disciple. Tenya said that it was all thanks to Shin leading the way and that he knew Shin was a good person and understood what he was saying. From someone who didn't care about helping others, Tenya had now become resolute in protecting a criminal. Shin decided to let it go temporarily, but warned that if she threatened the Yamada clan or Tenya, he wouldn't hesitate. At that moment, Shin and Narugai officially greeted each other, and Tenya, eager to reach the reverse stream, was reminded by Shin not to chatter. The biggest threat they had to face was the orange-haired monster, so they needed a proper strategy to confront it. No sooner had they mentioned him than he appeared. Luckily, Shin reacted quickly and carried the two away, but his throat was also wounded and bleeding, while the orange-haired man intended to take his head. Furious, Tenya charged forward, slashing in rapid succession. But the orange-haired man, now accustomed to his speed, easily dodged. The situation forced Tenya to use the ultimate sword technique, swinging his sword so fast that ordinary people couldn't see it. Yet the orange-haired man not only dodged but also approached him closely, flicking his finger and puncturing 4 holes in Tenya's body. Recalling the past, Tenya had once asked why Shin helped someone like him. Indeed, Shin saw Tenya as quite rude but recognized his inner potential. Each time he practiced with the sword, Tenya allowed his emotions to overpower his reason. Perhaps because he himself didn't want to become a samurai, Shin did not force his disciple to follow the rules of the samurai from the beginning. But he believed that one day Tenya would find something he wanted to protect, and his sword skills would surely help him then. However, until now, Tenya had only faced disdain from outsiders, having been born without status or wealth and seemingly lacking potential. Seeing that Tenya wanted to give up sword training, Shin set a condition. If Tenya could land a strike on him, he would accept his decision. However, Tenya wasn't interested in proving himself that way and sneaked away the next morning. By chance, he encountered Iron, who led him to visit the grave of Shen's brother, Tensen. Like Tenya, Tensen was undisciplined. He had talent but lacked motivation. While Shen focused on improving skills, Tensen wanted to live his own way and left the dojo. One day, Shen had to execute a prisoner, but to his horror, the man under his blade was Tensen. Despite hesitating for a moment, Shen still had to kill his brother in his role as a swordsman. Tensen's last words were an apology to his master, which since then had driven Shin to dedicate himself to teaching and helping others. After his conversation with Iron, Tenya immediately returned to the dojo to challenge his master. This was the first time he was so serious about training. Despite failing time again, Tenya refused to give up and kept going at it. Shin was the first to believe in his potential, even when Tenya himself lacked self-belief. At this moment, Tenya was very weak, having lost a lot of blood which left his fingertips cold, his vision blurring and his chest feeling like it was about to burst. He felt death was closer than ever, but knew that Shin and Nurugai needed his protection. With all of his remaining strength, Tenya lunged to fight hand-to-hand with the great fairy in front of him. Even if he had to die there, Tenya was determined to buy time for them to escape. However, after receiving a series of punches, the orange-haired man was still strong enough to damage Tenya's throat. Shin managed to stop the bleeding and drew his sword to rescue his disciple. Struggling to get up, Tenya urged his master to run, but his throat was so painful that he couldn't speak. Tenya screamed in despair as it seemed there was a divine being separating the master and disciple's understanding. Shin was about to rush forward but stopped abruptly, then with a bitter heart, picked up Nurugai and ran. Tenya waited for this moment, then spun around and punched the monster without missing a beat. In reality, Tenya had dreamed of a future in a simple hut with Nurugai, with 2 golden hearts, but dreams are just dreams. After running far from danger, Shen finally stopped and Nurugai cried desperately, asking him why he had abandoned Tenya, questioning if he wasn't his disciple. Ironically, that was exactly why Shen had done it. Tenya had sacrificed his life to buy time for their escape, and Shen couldn't waste the opportunity that Tenya had paid for with his life. Although there was nothing he could do at that moment, Shen vowed to make them pay. He would always remember the joyful expression on Tenya's face when they had fought together that day. The young man could have left, but he chose to stay. Returning to Gabimaru's group after searching around the village, Senta found nothing useful and was more confused due to the many mysteries that needed to be resolved. Senta felt like his head was about to explode after receiving too much information at once, which is why he fell asleep. During that night's watch, Gabimaru went to look for more clues as he no longer had time to hesitate. The dense fog made it hard for him to see the path, but if the wooden man's words were true, continuing south would lead him to paradise. Indeed, after leaving the forest, Gabimaru reached a clearing with eerie murmurs hidden within the mist. Upon closer inspection, he saw dry, twisted trees clasping their hands in prayer resembling the Hoko, but not reacting as he approached, so he guessed they couldn't move. Senta had mentioned that acting alone was very dangerous, but Gabimaru could not return without the Elixir of Life. Moving forward was his only choice at the moment. Unbeknownst to him, he was hiding behind a tree. Surprisingly, he actually reached the gates of paradise where gods and hermits resided. Gabimaru looked up the massive gate, seemingly man-made, and thought that if this was paradise, the Elixir of Life must be inside. As he was about to enter, a woman with orange hair suddenly appeared behind him. He stared wide-eyed, assessing the figure before him, who looked both similar and different from a human. Unclear what breed she might be. Disheartened, the woman with orange hair sat down, lamenting why it always had to be her, then told Gabimaru to go away. She had just fought with the Shin group and was not in the mood for a fight, even though her mission was to capture all the humans roaming the island. Hearing this, Gabimaru immediately guessed that they could turn humans into the Elixir of Life. After exchanging these words, they looked at each other silently before clashing. During the fight, as the orange-haired woman was surprised looking at her arm hanging, Gabimaru kicked her head, spinning it 360 degrees. The orange-haired woman quickly recovered and lunged at him but failed to catch him. Gabimaru realized his opponent was no ordinary one and continued to attack, not giving her a chance to retaliate. After spinning and delivering 3 kicks to the head of the orange-haired woman, he activated the ring technique of painful fire to burn her. Despite being burnt to a crisp, the orange-haired woman was still strong enough to punch Gabimaru against the wall, then transformed into a monster. Gabimaru survived the attack from him, leading him to doubt whether Gabimaru was really human. The two once again engaged in a fierce hand-to-hand combat, the orange-haired man striking Gabimaru with a palm that sent him flying, but his own arm was lost after that strike. Despite complaining about Gabimaru's stubbornness, this was the first time in centuries he had encountered such a strong opponent. Gabimaru was only concerned about the location of the Elixir of Life, and seeing that the orange-haired man did not respond, he attacked again, realizing that physical attacks were becoming ineffective. The orange-haired man suddenly released a powerful burst of energy. Gabimaru dodged one attack, but if this continued, he would be at a severe disadvantage. Gabimaru stalled for time to analyze and plan a counterattack, then kicked the orange-haired man in the stomach. However, Gabimaru himself did not understand why his attack was effective. The orange-haired man transformed back and channeled energy in her palm, then struck Gabimaru with a long-range palm strike that made him fall to the ground. Before he could recover from the shock, the opponent launched a series of punches from a distance. Gabimaru could only raise his hands to defend, his body suffering immense damage, feeling just like when he was beaten in the forest. Knowing that defending was futile, couldn't do much else, just as he was about to give up, the image of his beloved wife appeared before him. And Gabimaru would not allow himself to fall at this moment. The desire to reunite with his wife buffed his strength, driving him to trade blow for blow with the enemy. Gabimaru had to return even if his face was torn apart. He must return to save his wife. The more he thought about it, the faster Gabimaru's attacks became exponentially increasing. If the orange-haired man had the ability to regenerate, Gabimaru would tear her apart faster than she could recover. After a series of light-speed punches, Gabimaru turned the orange-haired man's body into a beehive and forced her to reveal the location of the Elixir of Life. At this point, the orange-haired woman had to use her trump card. Numerous flowers blossomed on her body, eventually enveloping her completely and forming a giant, bizarre-looking flower. Gabimaru reassured himself to stay calm. This was not the first time he had fought a monster. All he needed to do was analyze the opponent and strike accurately. However, in this form, her strength was absolute, and the electricity she emitted tore up the ground, causing it to tremble violently. Gabimaru rose from the rubble, breathless but still charging forward to attack. However, he couldn't penetrate the orange-haired woman's tentacles, and instead was shocked badly. Gabimaru planned to use the painful fire technique to burn her again, but his body had reached its limit. Even moving caused him excruciating pain. The monster continued to punch enthusiastically, and Gabimaru was in so much pain that he couldn't tell if he was dreaming or awake. When he came to, he saw his wife sitting next to him. He looked around dazed, thinking it had just been a nightmare, yet tears kept falling. While his wife went to make tea, Gabimaru looked around their familiar home. Then he quickly realized the harsh truth, apologizing to his wife because he couldn't return anymore. The monster tightened its grip on Gabimaru, blood spraying wildly. But it was not his blood. Rule number 20 of the Ninja Code: if faced with death, use all remaining strength to inflict as much damage as possible on the enemy before dying. Gabimaru directly applied the painful fire to himself, wanting to perish together with the great immortal. But in the end, he only managed to burn 2 of her tentacles. Now, Gabimaru had no strength left. Just as he was about to apologize to his wife before dying, Mei suddenly appeared beside him. She created a protective dome around them both, then slid down the cliff, falling into a deep abyss. The orange-haired woman quickly restored herself to her original state, wondering what Mei was doing there. In another development, Senta apologized for losing Gabimaru. He tried to find him the night before, but the fog only thickened, making it impossible to see anything. Helko explained that it was difficult for ordinary people to get through that fog, and Sagiri, guessing that Gabimaru was headed for paradise, immediately demanded to go find him. Yuzuriha objected, not wanting to venture into danger and arguing that as an executioner, she shouldn't care about the life or death of a criminal like Gabimaru. Surprisingly, Hoko wanted to go to paradise because Mai had gone missing. He could also safely lead the group through the fog. Hearing this, Yuzuriha quickly changed her tune, grabbing Sagiri's hands and feet, claiming she was very worried about Gabimaru. On the way, she kept asking about the Great Immortals, so the wooden man informed her that the Great Immortals are 7 hermits who were currently leisurely sitting in paradise. While they were actively discussing, a purple-haired messenger appeared, announcing that recently several strong humans had appeared on the island and had killed quite a few wandering gods. The blonde-haired man immediately blamed Yujin for not guarding carefully, citing his failure to catch 2 individuals by the seaside and his struggle with another outside the gate last night. He flicked his teacup at Yujin's head, then criticized him for letting a mere human force him to transform into a demon for battle. After using too many pills in the fight with Gabimaru the previous night, Yujin's body had become unbelievably decrepit and withered. Yufa was quickly reminded by the purple-haired leader that everyone here was a family and should not harm each other, and he was the only one allowed to physically affect Yujin. Yufa then reported that he had beaten Chobai nearly to death and thrown him into a pit, likely now decomposed. The purple-haired leader advised Yufa not to underestimate them, mentioning that the corpse of a gatekeeper had just been found beheaded, and anyone capable of killing them was not ordinary. These 2 and the one who had cornered Yujin last night were very different. Indeed, Chobai had carried his younger brother out of the pit, looking significantly more confident after being buffed numerous times. The purple-haired leader then turned to ask Yujin if he had killed the one who forced him to transform, and upon seeing his nod, began to pour something into a cup. After drinking it, Yujin rejuvenated but looked very annoyed. On the other side, the wooden man was calmly explaining that previously, one of the Great Immortals had attained enlightenment and became a saint, then split into 7 parts, which are now the 7 Great Immortals. They all look identical but have different personalities and roles. However, this is just a legend from when the wooden man was young. Yuzuriha, hearing this, guessed that Hoko used to be a leaf, surprised to learn that he and the others living on the island once looked like humans. The villages were prosperous until 1,000 years ago. The people lived longer but gradually turned into trees before losing consciousness. They'd all gathered here so that their souls could be invited to hide in paradise after death. Hoko's family also transformed. Sadly, his daughter was the first to change, and he was the last survivor. Paradise is the final resting place for the souls of the Great Immortals, who are gods choosing who enters. Anyone who challenges their power faces death. At this moment, Sagiri's only hope was that Gabimaru was alright, and indeed he was. After being saved by Mei and falling into the abyss, Gabimaru concluded that the so-called Great Immortals were nothing more than monsters. Thus, he could devise a plan to counter them. When they needed more people for the task, Tamura and Fuchai appeared right behind him. Upon seeing Gabimaru, Tamura immediately taunted him, commenting on his messed-up appearance. But the prospect of being stabbed in the stomach by Gabimaru flashed before his eyes. Despite this, given the current situation, Tamura warned Gabimaru not to take any reckless actions unless he wanted to die. Gabimaru himself knew it would be difficult to defeat Long Sword without sustaining injuries. From Tamura's stance, he deduced that there was no strength on his left side, implying a severe injury to his left arm. At this moment, both sides understood that the outcome of the battle would be the death for both of them. Fuchai quickly intervened, urging them not to waste time on futile matters. However, Tamura thought differently, believing that all battles start by assessing the preliminary movements of the opponent. Still, Fuchi insisted that showing off strength was unnecessary, and what they should do now is gather information from Gabimaru's side. He had a way to achieve this without fighting. So he drew his sword and asked Gabimaru if he was confident he could defeat both of them. Knowing he was at a disadvantage, Gabimaru changed tactics and bent down to ask for their cooperation. Hearing this, Tamura swiftly drew his sword and slashed down quickly, yet Gabimaru remained seated, unflinching, indicating that the young man had no intention of deceiving him. However, this disappointed Tamura, who needed strong warriors, not cowards who easily bowed before enemies. Fuchai criticized Tamura's narrow-mindedness, wanting to know the real reason Gabimaru readily bowed without hesitation. After hearing him talk about a battle with a figure among the celestial elders, both Tamura and Fuchai were so shocked that they dropped their jaws. While Long Sword wondered why he hadn't encountered a worthy opponent, Fuchai was interested in their exceptional regenerative abilities. Of course, Gabimaru was completely clueless, merely wanting to earn a pardon to return to someone, and he would do anything to achieve that. While Fuchai was skeptical, needing more evidence to prove Gabimaru's words were true, Tamura agreed immediately because he was not interested in the pardon but wanted to become immortal. Fukai thought he would take the Elixir of Immortality himself until he laughed, saying the approach was too boring. What Tamura aimed for was to make his name resonate throughout the country and become a legend. Wanting his image to be remembered in history forever, Fukai thought the goal was ridiculously unrealistic. But no one taxes dreams, so Tamura could keep dreaming. Actually, Fuche wasn't concerned about Tamura's far-fetched dreams, but was very interested in those immortal beings, and he was ready to dissect them as soon as Tamura defeated them. Thus, a three-person alliance was formed with different objectives. The first thing Fuche wanted to know was who this pink-haired girl was. Gabimaru couldn't hide his surprise when he saw how Mai had suddenly grown up and now she could even talk. Gabimaru immediately rushed to ask Mai to provide information about the Elixir of Immortality, and then apologized to her for being too abrupt. Thanking Mai for saving his life, Gabimaru wanted to know if her power was similar to that of the Celestial Elders, but she said nothing. Meanwhile, Senta, after connecting the data he had with the story that Hoko had told, concluded that this place was not Shinsenkyo, but clearly a religious system created by humans. Terms like paradise or the names of the Celestial Elders were all terminologies used by different religions. All these mixed elements came from interpretations of culture, crudely mixed together, while specific eras and cultures were loosely connected. Ultimately, all evidence led to a named MAPPA who founded a new religion with the intent to overthrow the government. The religion he established resembled this place because it was patched together from various religions. That was why Senta had always felt something was off about this place, not just in beliefs but also regarding the monsters and the structure of the island. He thought someone had created this island and even had people return from it unmutated. They could find the Elixir of Immortality and go home. After pouring out a long stream of thoughts, Senta realized he had spoken a bit too much. But Sagiri highly appreciated his ability, and aside from keeping watch, Senta was really trustworthy. Meanwhile, Yuzuriya pointed out an important issue. If what Senta said was true, this twisted ideology had lasted thousands of years, questioning whether they could defeat it. Moreover, it was still unknown how Gabimaru and Mai were doing. Sagiri was sure he was still alive, perhaps now planning and executing his plan to reunite with his loved one. Indeed, Gabimaru was convincing Mai to reveal the secrets of the Celestial Elders and how to defeat them. Due to Mai's still developing language skills, she could only summarize her thoughts with the word Tao, followed by a few other incomprehensible words and gestures. Gabimaru didn't understand what Mai was trying to convey, and upon hearing the word Tao, Fukai mentioned that it was related to the concept of lunsa in traditional Chinese medicine. Simultaneously, Hoko was explaining to the others that Tao is the power that flows through all things. Everything in the world is created by the flow of Tao, and unlocking it is akin to touching the origin of the universe. Yuzuriya found the explanation unhelpful, joking that she might have understood it better if there was a handsome teacher present. In another development, Nurugai was hiding behind a tree and then rushed to attack Shin from behind, yet he countered without needing to turn around. Shin told Nurugai she could do as she wished, but he still held the view that he wouldn't teach her swordsmanship. Nurugai earnestly begged her master to teach her so she could avenge Tenya, but Shen, not wanting to see any more children die before him, refused to teach her swordsmanship and even rejected the title of master from her. Nurugai, in tears, clung to Shen's clothes, saying she couldn't stand watching her loved ones die and hoped Shen would take her as his disciple. Shen explained that learning this was not something that could be achieved in a day or two, as everything in the world has its own wave pattern. Thus, despite being blind, Shin could still discern Nurugai's height, weight, and even her head and hairstyle. Utilizing wave patterns not only enhances one's senses, but also physical capabilities. Shin taught Nurugai to arrange her thoughts to sense these waves neither too intensely nor too quietly. This is also the Tao that Mei and Hako refer to. Everyone interprets it differently, but all lead back to the same essence. Shin instructed Nurugai to achieve a balance between rage and peace, which would allow her to easily detect waves. This mental state enables a person to exceed their normal capabilities, but it's not a skill that can be easily acquired. Nurugai's grip on the sword was still incorrect, so the day she would master the art was still far off. Thus, Shin showed her the correct way to hold it. Just then, a large monster appeared behind Shen, and with a slight movement, he severed its hand and head. Shin pointed out that the speed of the blade was also something Nurugai needed to consider. Cutting into the fatty parts would make the sword sharper. As Shen demonstrated the expertise of swordplay, Nurugai quickly drew her sword to mimic him before he changed his mind. Although Shen could defeat the lesser gods, he stood no chance against the Celestial Elders and still needed more skills, which were a luxury not available on this island. Meanwhile, several lesser gods were approaching Gabimaru's location, and Tamura immediately charged forward, sweeping away the first wave with a single move. He believed that the quickest way to understand Tao was through practice, and fortunately, There were plenty of monsters available for him to hone his skills. Tamira then lifted Mai onto his shoulders, asking her to teach him the power of Tao. Elsewhere, Gabimaru noticed another figure distinctly different from the lesser gods hidden in the mist. Contrasting with the chaotic scene outside, two celestial elders were happily practicing spelling with each other, anticipating more elixirs from the two brothers, Chobi and Tomo, who had been thrown into a pit. Confident that no one could escape from that pit, Chobi was using all his strength to carry his younger brother up. Chobi swore to kill them at any cost, and seeing his brother's determination, Tomo agreed to go along and started planning their attack. Cho boldly stated they didn't need a plan because he had discovered that the celestial elder's weakness was in their lower body. When he cut a golden-haired entity in half, it regenerated from the bottom up, not from the heart or head. They were like plants, so the attack needed to target the root, not the top. In a swift move, Chob also broke off an arm from below in the pit to eat. Just when a bizarre-faced individual appeared, the brothers immediately retreated while this new figure introduced himself as here to inspect on behalf of the celestial elders. Other Taoists had also arrived at locations with people, specifically those observing the group around Gabimaru. Unlike the flawed lesser gods who were not allowed into paradise, the Taoists directly served the celestial elders and were their right-hand men. This Taoist demanded the brothers return to the pit to continue the elixir refinement process, but before he could finish his sentence, Chobai charged and attacked. The Taoist angrily punched but missed Chobei's face. However, Chobai grabbed his arm and broke it in a swift motion. The Taoist, surprised that a mortal could absorb Tao, declared that if peace could not be achieved, he was ready to kill them both. Chobai told Tuma to handle the lesser gods so he could focus on his specialty, and with just a few flashes of his sword, all were swiftly dealt with. The Taoist wasn't worried at all because, through the flow of Tao, he knew that Chobai was gradually exhausting. Chobai, driven by fury, attacked like a whirlwind, but without utilizing Tao, his efforts were in vain because the Taoist could regenerate his body instantly. After letting Chobai tire himself out from the relentless attacks, the Taoist finally delivered a blow that flattened Chobai to the ground. Seeing his brother fall, Tomo rushed towards him, but was intercepted by the group of lesser gods. The sorcerer was about to grab Chobei's head and throw him into the pit, but Chobai was just waiting for this opportunity to tear the sorcerer's face apart. Surprising even his own brother, Chobai asked Tomo to come back and deal with the unruly gods, which further shocked the sorcerer when his throat had recovered. Perhaps being thrown into the alchemy pit had changed Chobei's body, and more surprisingly, Chobai could now see a light emanating from the sorcerer, something that ordinary humans could not detect. Seeing his opponent frozen, Chobai guessed he had hit the right spot. Presumably, the light was the key to killing the celestial immortals. At this moment, Chobai's path suddenly strengthened. Realizing this man was too dangerous, the sorcerer was forced to kill him immediately before things escalated further. Thus, Chobai took 2 palms from a distance as he could not yet discern the path, and his arms were subsequently broken from blocking a direct attack. However, within seconds, they had recovered to their original state, and he even managed to land a punch on the sorcerer. Chobei's path continuously increased, frightening the sorcerer as this strength had surpassed human limits. Tomo knew his brother was a master of adaptation, but this rapid pace was also overwhelming him. In fact, Chobai himself was not clear what was happening. He only felt his body was ecstatic as if he was Superman. Cho was not afraid of turning into a monster because there is nothing in the world that lasts forever except for one thing. Recalling the day when the brothers were dragged back to the den by bandits, who intended to slash their faces to satisfy their brute desires, Tomo was chosen to be cut first. But Cho proactively took the knife and cut his own face instead of his brother's, causing even the bandits to pause. Now Chobai was overcoming every attack and rushing towards the sorcerer, landing a punch in his belly, causing him to cough up blood. Indeed, his judgment was spot on. Facing the ever-increasing strength of Chobai, the sorcerer could only attack from a distance, but unluckily for him, Chobai had seen through it and dodged beautifully. Now seeing the path wrapping around his opponent's body, the sorcerer panicked and called 500 celestial gods to protect him. But Tomo had already wiped them out a while ago. The more disheartened the sorcerer felt, the more exhilarated Chobai became, challenging him to show more before crushing his hand underfoot. Seeing the way his opponent gathered strength, Chobai immediately put it into practice, punching a hole in the sorcerer's body with the first strike. The wound that could not heal caused him to scream in pain. In stark contrast to Chobei's current satisfaction, Chobai even saw the sorcerer's death through the path. Chobai struck the already bleeding wound again, marking the end for his opponent. Meanwhile, Tomo quietly observed the scars on his brother's body, which were growing larger, causing him concern. At that moment, Shobi abruptly turned to ask his brother what was wrong. His face was momentarily distorted. Tomo wondered if he was seeing things. He was relieved that his brother was alive, but the vine-like scars were too suspicious. Coincidentally and surprisingly, Gabimaru's scars also showed similar marks, the difference being that she didn't need to fight, but merely sat on Tamura's shoulders, teaching him the path. However, the little girl could only speak a few words, so Tamura didn't understand anything, and he had to switch from one technique to another to test, but still without success. Seeing Gabimaru continuously thrashing the monsters, Tamura asked if it looked correct yet, but the soulless one received a similar comment from him. Meanwhile, Fuche was excitedly examining the monster corpses because their internal structures varied. Although they looked quite similar on the outside, one resembled a fish while another resembled a human. From this, he concluded that each monster had a different weakness, and the pink-haired girl was also an enigma. Gabimaru remembered when he almost died, Mai had used a mysterious power to carve through rock and escape. A normal person couldn't do that. Stared intensely, Mai became frightened and cried loudly. Tamura scolded Gabimaru for glaring at the girl, but he didn't care. Now that Gabimaru was his disciple, he strictly forbade making women cry. Gabimaru kicked off a monster's head and asserted that he was no one's disciple. Fuchai, overhearing the debate between the two, suddenly felt that the soulless one was more human than the rumors suggested. At this moment, the sorcerer who had been motionless from the beginning saw Mai. He immediately rushed to attack Tamura and then grabbed Mai towards him using his cloak. The sorcerer respectfully knelt on the ground and said he had been searching for Mai for a very long time. It had been centuries since she was banished from the palace and disappeared from paradise, leaving the 500 sorcerer brothers feeling extremely disappointed. Although he was forbidden to search for Mai, fortunately today he found her here and wanted her to return with him. Then the sorcerer informed the Gabimaru group that Mai looks human but eats like the celestial beings. Gabimaru knew Mai was not human, but he did not expect her to have such a special identity. Watching the sorcerer pleading for Mai to return to paradise and lead them, Gabimaru hesitated, unsure what to do with Mai. But when he saw her tearful eyes, he didn't hesitate and jumped in front of Mai, surprising both his teammates and the opponents. Even he was surprised by his own impulsive action. Although unsure of the facts, Gabimaru didn't want Mai to cry anymore. The sorcerer, finding Gabimaru too troublesome, called more teammates to transform them all into pills. Immediately after, snakes and butterflies converged here, as they are the masters of these insects. While Gabimaru was carefully planning how to approach them, Tamura had already taken the initiative to slash the centipedes. He thanked them for taking his left arm, so now his sword skills were even stronger than before. While he was enthusiastically speaking, the sorcerer struck Tamura's face with a palm. Gabimaru immediately recognized it as an invisible attack and warned Tamura not to act recklessly. At this moment, the centipede user charged at Gabimaru while Tamura dealt unexpectedly with the butterfly controller. Due to the close distance, Gabimaru accidentally punched Tamura. The sorcerer disdainfully said they were not his match and had nothing to do with Mai. So why bother protecting her? Gabimaru admitted he was right, however, since setting foot on this island, he had become a different person. And what was wrong with repaying someone who had once saved him? Gabimaru wondered why the sorcerers were so obsessed with Mai, and they openly replied that they study the path and clouds are an important link in that process. There are 5 steps to mastering the path: Tao Guidance, Embryo Essence, Celestial Mantle, Celestial Cycle, and most importantly, the Central Rune Technique. The Central Rune Technique requires a partner because it involves the circulation of yin and yang. Tamura, not understanding, was enlightened by Fuchai that this was about that kind of path. Realizing it, Tamura could only exclaim that this was too absurd, but the centipede leader considered it a noble form of cultivation. All things have either yin or yang energy, and one must develop their path to the point where both circulate. The celestial immortals are those who developed this technique and have been practicing it for thousands of years. Thanks to the flexible circulation of yin and yang, the celestial immortals have the ability to shape-shift. Therefore, the sorcerers need a partner to circulate yin and yang, and it just so happens that the quality of Mai's energy is the highest. Although Mai has the same origin as the celestial immortals, she possesses only yin energy and was thus expelled from the palace. Rin gave her 2 options. One is to die like a stray dog, the other is to stay in paradise as a training partner for the sorcerers. The scars on Mai's body are evidence of this, but unfortunately, she fled soon after, so they couldn't practice. The more Tamura heard, the more it grated on his ears and eyes, and Gabimaru beside him was also casting sharp glances towards the 2 sorcerers. Mai's situation was not much different from that of his wife, and he could not accept them being treated as objects. Knowing they couldn't transform them into pills, the 2 sorcerers immediately merged with the centipedes and butterflies to wipe out the group. Tamura leaped up and slashed one's wings. The swarm of butterflies flew towards him, but he dodged. However, he inhaled poison and fell to the ground. At the same time, Gabimaru used pyrotechnics to burn the arm of the centipede user, who quickly activated a fairy technique that sent needles flying towards Gabimaru, forcing him to jump back to dodge. The swarm of butterflies only waited for an opportunity to attack, but Gabimaru used a fireball ninjutsu to create a wall of fire blocking their path. The centipede leader prevented his teammates from continuing their attack for fear of hitting Mai. Gabimaru took this opportunity to observe their strength. He vaguely sensed the path, but that was not enough to defeat the enemy. At that moment, Fuchi enlightened him that only a pure heart could see the path. To verify this, he asked Mai to help him sense the path by letting her touch him. Gabimaru also felt something when Mai held his hand. Fuchi advised him to weaken his mind, but it was too difficult to do so in the midst of battle. Suddenly, Mai said his vulnerability was the seed of strength, and with Sagiri's words, Gabimaru could clearly see the flow of the path. Therefore, when he returned to the battle, none of the enemy's attacks could touch him. This time, Gabimaru did not rush to strike, but calmly predicted the enemy's intentions and direction of attack through the path. Gabimaru himself also sensed everything around him by accepting his own vulnerability, and he understood how Sagiri moved forward while being shaken. Seeing the attack of the centipede monster, Gabimaru only needed one hand to completely strip off the outer armor of the centipede and defeat him. Even the butterfly leader who tried to sneak attack met the same fate. At this point, he had to confess that 3 sorcerers were sent to observe humans because the celestial immortals sensed that the people who came to the island this time were of a different caliber. He wanted to admit defeat, but instead secretly formed seals behind his back to control the centipedes. Gabimaru immediately leaped over Tamura, kicked fire at them, and then struck directly at the butterfly leader, while Tamura simultaneously split the centipede leader in half below. In another development, Hoko had led the group to flee to paradise and was killed by Muton with just a flick of the hand. He was very surprised, as this was the first time in 1,000 years that someone had made it this far. Yuzuriha felt she couldn't match her opponent. Immediately turned to flee, but was unfortunately easily captured by him. Sagiri darkened her face, knowing well that Muton was stronger than all. Yet she drew her sword and demanded that he release Yuzuriha. Hoko, though beheaded, was still alive and said that he was a great celestial being. Muton laughed heartily, stating that it wasn't enough to kill Hoko, but he would accelerate the transformation and turn him into a tree. Hoko accepted his fate, only hoping his soul would be invited to paradise. Unexpectedly, Muton bluntly revealed that all things about souls and religion were merely scams created by the Master to maintain order on the island. The island was originally a site for experiments on life. Hoko and all others were just part of an experiment, while those who came to the island were research materials. For example, the Kyoshi group was created by Muton from adventurers who came to the island, making it easier to toy with them. Meanwhile, those of noble character would be turned into pills, also known as the Elixir of Life that people often mention. However, these only work on great celestials. If ordinary people consumed them, they would turn into trees. Evidence of this was that the people in Hoko's village could live forever, but did not achieve the youth they longed for. Until now, the great celestials were still researching a solution, but had not yet found a promising result. Hearing this, Sagiri thought of Gabimaru, realizing that without the medicine, there would be no pardon. Meanwhile, Muton announced that their journey had come to an end, and they just had to obediently follow him now. No sooner had he finished speaking than Yuzuriha next to him disappeared, and to his surprise, she had thrown a kunai that made vulnerable and beheaded him. Yuzuriha thought she had escaped Muton and immediately ran to tell Sagiri to leave, but she remained rooted to the spot. Yuzuriha reminded Sagiri that their top priority was to survive. However, just as they were about to leave, Muton's head regrew. He ordered the Kyoshi to follow Yuzuriha, and then had them restrain her, but she managed to dodge in time. It turned out that Yuzuriha also saw and could use the Tao, only in her village people called it Kai. Muton thought she hadn't fully grasped the use of the Tao and intended to teach her. Suddenly, Senta stepped out and said if he wanted to kill her, he had to get past him first. Muton acknowledged that Senta and Sagiri had some talent, but he had his eyes set on Yuzuriha, realizing she was the strongest. Sagiri was surprised that Senta would draw his sword for a criminal, wondering if he had feelings for Yuzuriha, when unexpectedly, Muton struck her with a palm technique that sent her flying. He explained that this technique was performed by gathering and launching Tao, but Yuzuriha won't be able to learn this even in 1,000 years. Just as he finished speaking, Senta severed Muton's limbs, but Yuzuriha didn't need his help, as she had decided to play her trump card ruthlessly. After drinking something, Yuzuriha's body began to turn into a slime, which combined with her ring magic allowed her to transform the liquids into a solid to attack. This was followed by a series of ring spells that split Mutant in half, yet he easily regenerated his body, even commenting that she was strong. Senta slashed Mutant's eye, asking Yuzuriha to join forces with him to defeat this monster. The two continuously launched attacks at their opponent, but they missed Mutant and ended up hindering each other. After observing her use of Tao, Mutant lost interest and concluded she was not as strong as he expected. Nevertheless, he still extended a warm welcome to them to paradise, the land of the invincible gods. At this time, Sagiri struggled to get up and asked Hoko about the weaknesses of the great celestials. Hoko, still regarding Mutant as a god, accepted the divine punishment. Sagiri understood his feelings, but continuing this way would lead to their deaths, and Hoko would not be able to meet Mai again. Indeed, upon hearing this name, his expression changed. When she grasped the weakness of the Celestials, Sagiri immediately joined the battle despite being underestimated by her opponent. Despite this, she resolutely charged forward, thrusting her sword into Mutant's abdomen and then twisting the blade. Cutting through his body, legend has it that Tao is born from the stomach, travels through the body, and returns once more. Injuring this spot could potentially kill Mutant. However, Sagiri didn't have enough Tao to do this, and Mutant could regenerate from any wound. He believed that none of the three present had the ability to kill him, when suddenly Sagiri's Tao surged and she delivered a slashing strike towards Mutant. Thanks to his quick reflexes, he dodged the critical strike, but the wound on his face continued to bleed, indicating that it could not regenerate. In fact, Sagiri had seen a halo of light around Mutant when she got close. If that was Tao, she knew how to strike it. She had seen a similar halo around Gabimaru and even Yoda, the giant before. After the recent attack, Mutant's attention shifted to Sagiri, and he eagerly wanted to transform her into a useful pill. Therefore, Mutant used the underground travel technique to disappear instantly, and Sagiri would have been at a loss if Yuzuriha hadn't timely intervened to stop him. She explained that Mutant hadn't disappeared but had merely minimized his Tao so that they couldn't detect him, a technique similar to hers, which is how she caught on to him. Sagiri calmed herself and prepared to strike, but Mutant acted quicker, ordering the Kyoshi to kill Yuzuriha. However, Senta swiftly dealt with them. The situation was not looking good, forcing Mutant to bite off his arm to escape. While simultaneously launching a palm strike towards Yuzuriha, she immediately jumped over Senta, allowing him to take the blow for her. Sagiri also continued to unleash swift sword strikes, and maintaining her breath while attacking gradually wore her down. But thanks to the well-coordinated efforts of the three, Mutant was now just a torso rolling on the ground. Just when they thought it was the end game, he suddenly rose into the air by controlling Tao in the atmosphere. After changing his body to a female form, Mutant sent down thousands of Tao rays, causing the ground to shake violently. The trio quickly ran like ducks. Unfortunately, Senta was struck down face first, while Sagiri's nose bled profusely and her vision began to blur. Just when she was about to give up, Yuzuriha encouraged her not to quit, suggesting that these were signs that the enemy was worried. Mutant had to dodge every attack from Sagiri because her Tao was his nemesis, and since he was just a monster and not a divine being, there must be a way to kill him. Yuzuriha drank another vial of solution and used the slime to grab Mutant's legs, ready to endure a barrage of Tao rays just to pull him down to the ground, making it easier for her teammates to act. Senta stabbed a sword from behind, risking his life to hold Mutant, waiting for Sagiri to rush forward and slash across his abdomen. Finally, after the efforts of all three, Mutant got striked. After defeating just one foe with such difficulty, there were still 6 more with powers far beyond human comprehension and beyond anything Hoko had described. However, the biggest issue now was the non-existence of the Elixir of Life. Seeing Sagiri worried, Yuzuriha suggested taking the gold from here as compensation for the lack of the elixir. While she was happily considering the pile of gold, Sagiri quietly asked Senta if he had feelings for her. Startled, he vehemently denied it, clarifying that he was just envious of her freedom. In his youth, Senta had wanted to become an artist, but was forced by his parents to continue the family legacy. Despite his dislike for the Yamada or becoming a sword tester, he hated killing, which led him to spend a lot of time rationalizing it. A reason he was familiar with many different religions. Ironically, due to his diligence, Senta's rank gradually increased until he finally gave up his dream and began fulfilling his duties. Until Yuzuriha saw through him, Senta was repeatedly confused by her, sometimes cold and brutal personality. He was both envious and admired her freedom, even though he knew that a swordsman admiring a criminal was taboo. Sagiri, feeling a similar sentiment towards Gabimaru, empathized deeply with Senta. Meanwhile, on the Soulless One's side, he was asking Mai why she had been following him, then thanked her for saving his life twice. Fukai, witnessing this scene, recalled Sagiri's remarks about Gabimaru, who was not as heartless as his nickname suggested. His true self was clearly revealed when it came to a specific person. Seeing this softer side piqued Fuchi's curiosity about how it might affect his work. At that moment, Gabimaru suddenly had a nosebleed and fainted, while Yuzuri had noticed that where Mutin had died, many flowers had grown. Suddenly, when the flowers lunged at her, but Senta shielded her with his body. The lives he had taken suddenly flashed before his eyes, but Yuzuriya appeared and destroyed them all. Her presence brought a new breeze into Senta's bleak life, and he no longer wanted anything more than to watch over her from a distance. At this point, Senta's body began to bloom while Mutin had shifted into a demon-like combat state. Just as he was about to attack the two women with hundreds of flowers, Shin appeared just in time to slash them all away. He calmly instructed Nurugai to cut the flowers and roots off Senta to slow down the blooming process and then led everyone away from the area. Based on the movement of scents and sounds of the waves, Shin realized that this was the killer of Tenya, his unfortunate student. On his way here, Shin had experimented on various creatures to test the use and nature of the waves. Also known as Tao, he now intended to demonstrate to Mutin that even the immortal could still die as usual. Indeed, as soon as the enemy initiated the attack, Shin merely drew his sword slightly and sliced them into hundreds of pieces. Meanwhile, the flowers ceased to grow on Senta's body, but he was currently losing too much blood. Yuzuriya took out a bottle of medicine, but Senta refused to use it, while Sagiri was worried for Shin, who was fighting alone outside. Nurugai reassured her to stay calm because their master was very strong. She believed her master couldn't possibly die here. Just as Nurugai had said, Shin was fighting Mutin on equal footing, using numerous cunning strikes that forced him to resort to a bullet rain that shattered the gates to paradise. In the dense smoke and dust, Shin's sword thrust forward, stabbing through Mutin's abdomen, and right after, Shin appeared and struck again, making him fall rolling over. Yuriga was taken aback, her eyes wide, while Nuriga proudly stated that her master obviously had to be strong. Meanwhile, Sagiri particularly noted that Mutin couldn't regenerate, indicating that Chen's Tao truly had an effect on him. Although his experiment was effective, numerous roses suddenly sprouted on his body. It turned out that Mutin had cunningly used small scratches to plant the seeds of flowers there, aiming to transform Shin into a tan. Unhesitatingly, he cut all their roots, and although blood soaked his clothes, it didn't deter or dishearten him. However, the excessive blood loss made Shin worry that he might not last long enough to send this monstrosity to the grave. Seeing this, Sagiri wanted to go out and help him, while Yuzuriya chose to stay behind. Now there was no time left to think. As long as one could move, one had to fight. Sagiri pointed out that the monster's weakness lay in its core. Attacking the core was the only chance for victory. However, Mutin now had two cores, and one scratch from him was lethal. Therefore, Sagiri and Nurugai wrapped themselves in bandages and Yuzuriya's slime to prevent scratches and block pollen from entering their bodies. Sagiri and Nurugai were to act as bait and attack from the front to create an opportunity for Shin to approach and sever Mutin's core. While discussing it, Mutin suddenly attacked Nurugai, but fortunately, she dodged in time due to her agile skills. Yet Mutin's speed was formidable. As soon as he moved behind Nurugai, Sagiri immediately rushed to block the attack and save the girl. Her swift and firm swordsmanship surprised Chen. Feeling that Sagiri was predicting Mutin's movements based on the Tao, even faster and more accurate than himself. Pleased, Chen began to implement her plan. As he ran, he cut off the pollen filaments. Mutin immediately rained down a laser storm. But it couldn't touch even a hair on Shin, and the two girls behind him cut off the remaining filaments. Shin just waited for the chance to rush to Mutin, using all of his might to cut his legs and then the rest immediately. Finally, Mutin was defeated, his regeneration slowing down. However, Sagiri was now losing blood, and Shin's condition was even worse than hers. Mutin joyously rained down destruction again while Sagiri, holding Nurugai, ran desperately and Shin advanced, driven by increasing hatred. Shin couldn't forgive himself for abandoning Tenya, so he was determined to drag this monster down with him if he had to die here. Shin's Tao surged like a storm. When Mutin tried to knock him away, the two girls pinned his hands to the ground. At the crucial moment to strike, Shin hesitated not to chop down because he couldn't sense the strong wave emanating from it. Just then, Senta shouted the real weakness location, for if the Grand Celestial was a type of plant, the core was obvious for him. Following Senta's advice, Shin delivered an unstoppable sword strike, the critical blow completely destroying Mutin. Before dissolving into the void, Mutin revealed a face more content than ever, as he had been waiting for this moment for 1,000 years. Now finally realized, Mutin's death left behind a vibrant bloom of hundreds of flowers at the gates of paradise. However, the pressing issue now was that Senta and Shin were gravely weak due to severe blood loss, while Yuzuriya had only one dose of medicine left. She believed that Shin should use it since Senta was already very weak. Despite facing death, Senta wasn't frightened, but instead felt happy to die in the arms of someone he had always admired. That evening, Sagiri stood silently in front of Senta's grave, grateful to Yuzuriha for helping her understand many things. Whether they were Taoists or criminals no longer mattered. Now the only thing important was making it back alive. Meanwhile, Gabimaru had just awakened from a stupor, alertly looking around and asking where he was. Fuche replied that they were hiding in a cave on the sheer wall of the valley, but he had no memory of this. At the same time, Sagiri's group was delving deeper into paradise. Yuzuriha found some clothes to change into, puzzled why Mirugai, a boy, wanted to wear a dress. While they bickered, Shin advised Sagiri to relax a bit before settling the chaos on the other side. He began to piece together the information, starting with a power source called Tao. If mastered, it grants extraordinary abilities, but excessive use could deplete one's physical energy, not to mention the side effects that could alter one's mental or physical state or even affect a person's consciousness or memories. In the worst-case scenario, abusing Tao could lead to death, which reminded Yuzuriha of the Elixir of Immortality, recently confirmed as non-existent. However, Sagiri believed it existed because Gabimaru had once mentioned his village chief was immortal. Yuzuriha countered that it might just be an illusion, explaining that shinobi often show someone a supernatural phenomenon at a young age to easily control and manipulate them, embedding the memory deep in their subconscious, rendering it harmless to the person who enacted it. Yuzuriha knew this because her village employed similar methods, and even the wife Gabimaru often mentioned was likely a part of an illusion, as Sagiri had never heard him mention his wife's name before. Meanwhile, Gabimaru was confused about why he was here. Whether the people before him were friends or foes, all he remembered was that he was a soulless ninja, the greatest of Iwadakure village. While resting, Gabimaru planned to quietly gather information, ready to act if they discovered his intentions. Mi, glancing at him, noticed that Gabimaru had changed from before. Meanwhile, Sagiri was sleepless on the other side, disturbed by what she had learned, and not even Shin's jokes could cheer her up. It was only the third night on the island, yet nearly all her teammates had perished. Not to mention Gabimaru's disappearance, which left her unable to calm down. Shin, surprised, thought Sagiri might have been struck by love, but she quickly dismissed it, knowing his tendency to frivolously link everything to romance. In reality, Sagiri hadn't figured out her feelings for Gabimaru, but if what Yuzuriha said was true, she couldn't help but feel sorrow for him. A young man exploited into becoming a killing machine with his beliefs deceived. Despite this, Sagiri believed that Gabimaru would not give up and would survive to return. Thanks for watching. Want more anime recaps? Subscribe to channels and turn on notification bell. See you later. Watch those next videos.